I'm Ben Kish. I'm instructor here at the college in management, entrepreneurship, and leadership classes. So where I've learned a lot about communication through my career is I spent several years in corporate America, and one of the key things I learned in communication there is to have evidence-based information, to have facts, to have data, and no mistakes.
Hi, my name is Nick Roberts. I'm an instructor here at Blue Ridge Community College in the Finance and Business program. So my background consists of over 20 years in business, mostly in banking and finance. Much of that was in corporate America, working for large financial institutions. The importance of written communication in both of those worlds was extraordinary. Just trying to communicate. Imagine you're in a leadership role at a bank, right? And you're trying to communicate to upper executives or even to your team. And the most frequently used form of communication is email, and making sure that it's concise and the directives are very specific and understood.
Make sure that you're thoughtful and accurate, and it's completely and accurately communicated. I spent 10 years in the consulting world working with clients who would read reports. That's what our main presentation was. Maybe a PowerPoint display that we'd give, but it was a report that we'd hand off. And one of the most important things I learned in consulting was tell a story. Make sure that you've captured your readers or your audience's interest, and then take them through the analysis in a way that's kind of like telling a story, and then in the end there's a conclusion to your story.
Just imagine that you're working with clients and you're having to communicate to them different recommendations and different changes, and how critical it is to make sure that nothing is lost in transition and everything is succinct in how you're writing.
It's very similar to meeting somebody for the first time. When someone takes a look at what you've written, they're going to take a first impression of how well you communicated your thoughts, your analysis, your information. Just like when we meet people in person, you make that first impression, and that is a very important way to connect with somebody.
So regarding format, what we're looking for from a professional perspective is an introduction, then a body, and then moving into a conclusion. So very standard, but very succinct. Somewhere between 3 and 5 paragraphs.
If you thoughtfully prepare your report or your essay or your analysis, you're going to show breaks in how your points are presented, the introduction, conclusion, and whatever your paragraphs are in between. If it all jumbles together, your format is not thoughtful, and it shows that you haven't really organized your thoughts, and you're not making it easy for the reader to follow your thought.
From a professional writing perspective, it's natural that we want to answer in first person, right? And we want to express our own opinion. But when we talk about professional writing, we like to do this from a third person perspective. So even though the question may be asked in the assignment as if it's directed towards us, from a first person, the expectation in our assignments and in our forums are that it's written in a third person format.
What we're really trying to do is separate our normal speak and what we talk like with our friends and family, and notch it up a bit so that we are taking out slang. We're taking out the casualness. We're not trying to sound academic, but we're not trying to sound like we're just chatting on the corner of the street.
So regarding the development of the response, I think it is natural for us to go ahead and just provide the correct answer, right? But how do we know it's the correct answer? And we have to ask ourselves why. Why are we stating this to be our personalized response or the correct answer? And so what we do is we support that answer with evidence. And so what we want to do is go ahead and look to the text, look to outside resources. There's an abundance of resources today, whether it's videos, podcasts, other forms of media, where we could go ahead and support our answer and really build out what our response is for the reader, in this case for the instructor, to understand that you tied it to the materials and that you're in a place that you understand it quite clearly, and that you're supporting it regarding your response.
Yeah, and here's where too often we're not spending enough time to show we've thought about the material that we're presenting, we've done the research to make sure that we're ready and versed, and we're using the appropriate sources to think through what it is that we're trying to communicate. So often I find students particularly answering in assignments where they're not even using the material that we asked about that was being studied during the week, and they're just kind of glossing through, talking about the subject rather than showing that they've done some research, they've got some depth to what it is they're communicating.
So one example, simple example of an assignment would be, are leaders important to an organization? And I think the simple answer is yes. Of course they're important organizations, but how do we build upon that? And in this example, you would take outside resources, okay, including the text and other information that you've researched to explain why you feel leadership is important in an organization, and really build upon and dig deep in your response.
And when you do that, when you have spent the time developing your thoughts, make sure you present it in an appropriate and a professional way, and the reader will notice it. It is something that shows up very quickly in your communication. In citations and support, what we're looking for here is if you are sourcing other materials, make sure you make that known and show it appropriately. We have that in many different of our English classes. We show how to do sourcing and how to do citations.
So regarding citations, right, there's a tremendous amount of resources at your disposal in today's environment. With the internet, we talked about earlier, any types of resources that are out there online, podcasts, videos, your text, other third-party resources, interviews, things of that nature. But we want to give credit where credit is due, right? Just as you would do in a professional environment. If you ascertained and received the information from another colleague or from another source, you'd want to cite that source. And there's plenty of resources both online or at the Blue Ridge Library to go ahead and make sure that you're citing your sources properly.
If something's been copied or fraudulently presented, you don't want to do that in school, and you really don't want to do that in a professional setting. So making sure that if you use something from another source, you're citing that source and that it's appropriately referenced.
So editing and proofreading, right? All of us have different levels or confidence in our written communications. And so it's important where you find an outside individual or source to go ahead and review your written assignment. So in many cases, that could be a close friend who's a great writer, or a family member who may have years of experience in writing narratives and professional analysis. Have them take a look at it, right? And then they can better you as an individual in writing.
Well, editing and proofreading is really important for many people because we tend not to do that. We have a tendency to write down what we want to communicate, cross it off our list that we do it, or did it, and hit the send button. And if it's an email or a text message, or if it's an assignment that we're writing, or some sort of an analysis in a report, if there are mistakes, it shows sloppy thoughtfulness. If there are misspellings, it shows you really didn't try very hard, you didn't proofread it. And if it isn't thoughtfully proofread and checked for errors, it kind of tells the reader that you didn't spend a lot of time on this, and you don't want to send that message, particularly in a professional setting.
How does that translate to the business community or your employer, right? So when you're in a job, in a role, it's a reflection. Your written communication is a direct reflection, in many cases, of how people presume your ability. That you've taken the time before you've sent that email to go ahead and proofread it, and that it's concise and that it's accurate.
What I've learned is the importance of communication can't be overstressed. It's such an important part of presenting not just our information, but who we are as a professional.